All right, looks like we're here at number 5 in the series. So if you're here at number 5 and you haven't watched every single one of the ones previous to this, so 1, 2, 3, and 4, this is you're going to miss out on a lot of real critical knowledge for this to have power. And so I highly recommend you go back and watch each and every one of them, because they all have something really critical to add. So now we're at this stage where I'm reading the comment again. I think that this was in number 3 that I read this one. Now I'm going to read it again, and all the pieces hopefully will come together. If I was a jury member, I would put into practice what I've learnt via this group, i.e., that I would be on a panel with my peers. I can't answer for those who swear an oath to uphold the law. Hopefully that means something to you now. Whether they bear the burden of listening to their conscience or blindly following orders. So this person says they can't conceive a way how they would be able to, be able to have some kind of assessment around that. Then what would they be doing on the jury is the first question. The answer cannot be black and white. Natural law may be immutable. I'm on board with that. But people are complicated. I would say it's possible that some who swear this oath to uphold the law go into the field with genuine intention. Now, you've seen it. If you watch number 4 especially, maybe you see that it isn't as genuine as you might be perceiving, right? So it's one thing to go into it with the genuine intention, but then what about once you met at the door with what it is they're making sure that you must do if you want to stay in this cult, right? Really think about that first, right? So there you have the evidence, right? Because in a jury, you'd have all this laid before you. Everything I've shown you, that would be on the table. So, your preconceived ideas about how you think reality really works is going to be blown out of the water pretty quick. So you want to be ready, really ready. And I don't believe you can be, because I'm going to show you why you can't very soon, for what you're going to come up against. If or when they become corrupted and I was to judge them as part of a jury, I would have a look at intent. I reckon I've established some pretty clear intent here. If they willfully continue to look the other way when they've seen the corruption, then I would judge them accordingly. Justice would be to remove them from their position. So we've already got an idea in mind of what she believes justice would be, right? And if our Constitution stands for anything, their action would be seen as acting against the people. So their assets would be stripped. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say that their assets would be stripped. That is just a decision that's been made in the past by other jury members. So you really need to understand that as well. Constitutions cannot write what should happen to someone. That's not a constitution. All they can do is actually agree to protect the individual from the tyranny of the majority or another individual, and that there's a system by which that can happen, and support that. That's pretty much the essence of what a constitution is for. So there's already a misunderstanding of that. If, on the other hand, they were genuinely sorry for their part in upholding the system but wanted to make amends, I would not be able to judge them with punishment. I would expect them to leave the job though. Right? So on one hand saying I'm not going to judge, on the other hand I'd expect this, right? So a little bit of confusion here. So now let me set the scene of a scenario, and let's see what you would do as a jury member. Okay, so let's go back 4 years, back to when the whole COVID scam started. I'm going to use a father, really loves his children, wants to protect his family, immediately sees that this is a hostile takeover, and starts seeing how it's all about taking over and destroying the family, right? And so he starts doing research and starts alerting his wife. He doesn't have the same level of intent to understand the truth. She's actually the other way. She likes to disappear on social media and just go off into fantasy, and has a real aversion to the laws of nature as how they operate. And he starts teaching her about what he's learning. Pretty soon, without too much time passing, she starts to get jack of it, and eventually, without him knowing, starts working towards how she's going to have him, let's call it muzzled. We'll call it that. So she organises an intervention order. right? And so the father, unbeknownst to all that, comes home one night, looks after his kids. The wife's not there, doesn't think too much of it, finds it a bit weird, but who's to know? Maybe went out with friends, yada yada. Puts his kids to bed, and one of his children that's still awake, has been aching to spend time with him. And they finally sit down together, and then there's a massive pounding at the door, one that they've never heard before. Goes down to the door, and it's our friendly police saying, "Open up." Anyway, let's cut it short. They break in, they arrest him, he has no idea why. His daughter's awake, he's fully traumatized, paralyzed, he's terrified. His armed bandits break in and take the father away. Now, during that whole time that he's being, handcuffed, and he can't do anything, one of the guys who's in uniform, these people that we've just been looking at, is actually shaking while he's patting him down. And he's so lost control of himself that he can't even figure out the difference between a top pocket and a shorts pocket, right? He's been told where his items are, the one who's patting him down, and he's been told it's down in the shorts pocket, and he's up the top patting down, the father at the top, and the father's like, "What are you doing? I've just told you where it is." So that's telling you this guy knows what he's doing, right? His conscience is screaming at him, yet he continues. So park that one. Anyway, the father gets taken away, right? He sees these predators that have broken in standing at the door of his house, his castle. It's been broken into. And then he's got these wolves standing at the door in costume while he's being carted off, totally disempowered. Now, I want you to sink into what that would feel like if that was you, right? Taken away by criminals in costume from your family for doing absolutely nothing. No evidence of anything. You're just taken away. So let's move on. The father gets humiliated, gets thrown into the lockup, freezing, hearing other people being traumatized by being locked up in there screaming, spends the night in there because he doesn't want to sign the paperwork. So in the morning, they come to him again, they get him to sign. He signs because he just wants to get out of there by now because his soul's been depleted. And he's not allowed to ever return back to his home ever again. Just like that. That's what these people do. Don't ask questions, they just do it. And so from that point onwards, their entire life is changed immediately. The father's been dispossessed. He's now treated as some kind of criminal. He needs to go to the fake court. They rule that he can't see his family ever again. He can't communicate with them. He can't actually even send them a message. You can't go anywhere near them, anywhere that they go to school or daycare or anything like that. He's not allowed anywhere near there. Totally shut off. That's what these people initiate. So let's move on. Now the mother, who thought the father was totally nuts because he's starting to talk about the state, what does she do? Well, in that time he's gone, she starts tuning all her old contacts that she's had sitting in the background of which males she believed would be a suitable mate for her. During lockdown, she believes that the state is fair income, but here she is going behind the back of the state that she loves so much to find a male partner, leaving her children exposed with someone else, that some stranger, babysitter, to look after them so she can start mating with this other male. Right? That's the mother's intention. That's all she cares about, really. During lockdown, right, where we're all meant to have this dangerous disease, we're meant to keep from each other. And she's sharing spit and other bodily fluids, etc. And then starts bringing that guy into the home, a total stranger, gets rid of the actual father, who's totally been disempowered, right, disconnected from his children. The children don't understand that he's just gone. No one's explained why. And then this is their new life. In the process, she gets child protection involved, which I call child harvesting. They start setting out a whole bunch of rules and procedures that this family needs to do. So she starts doing whatever she's told. Lets them run their life, but she knows that the way they're going about it is bent, but she does it anyway. The children have a bunch of other people intervening in their lives. They've got, these NGOs, like the McKillop Family Services, or I don't know what other kind of types there are, out there, and they're starting to provide caring services, etc., because the mother very cleverly knows how to work the social system and gets NDIS for her and some of her children. So now she's getting them to actually do the work for her. She no longer drives them to school, doesn't make their meals, doesn't take them to their activities. She doesn't do any of that. It's all these carers. They're cooking dinner, they're making their breakfast, they're sending the kids off to school, they're getting them ready. On top of that, they're making sure they get to the medical appointments, so they're getting them drugged up. The mother just stops behaving in a way that's actually needed by the children. Right? So once upon a time, there was a stable family life, and now there isn't. So on top of that now, and the damage that the children are going through, just being ripped from their father, he's just taken away, he's gone, he's demonized. She refuses to let them even talk about the father. Right? He's been totally murdered in her mind, and she won't have him being mentioned. The father's parents, when they try and see the child, if they actually mention the father, she then gets an intervention order against the father's parents. Right? So it's totally wiping out any contact with the father on any level. On top of that, then you have the surveillance that she puts up. Right? She puts up a bunch of cameras, gets security doors, turns the house into a fortress. Right? Is emotionally unavailable for her children. If her children need her, she's just not there. On top of that, she starts threatening suicide, right, in front of her children. Right? Is her life getting better now? Right? She's had help the whole time. Right? She's had psychological, appointments and stuff like that for years and years, and still doing it. And they end up just helping her get the NDIS. That's really what the purpose of it is. She hasn't grown, changed anything. Right? She's just been enabled to tell a lie that she doesn't get to prove, that the police actually work with her to create things that she didn't even know about, like sovereign citizen, so they can come and arrest this guy. Because what does sovereign citizen mean? It means domestic terrorist. So they actually pump her story up to a point where they go, okay, at this level, we can go and do this now. Now here's the kicker. If a police officer's wife was to do the same thing, who does she have to go to? She has to go to one of the cop members. What are the chances they're going to go and contrive some kind of story the same way they do against the average Joe? So already they would know there's a power differential that they get to sign off on. Right? Now, does that get looked at when people are thinking about these things? Now, that guy that's shaking, right, we'll go back to him. He could have just gone, you know what, I'm shaking. That's my conscience telling me this isn't right. There's no evidence here. We're just acting on something on hearsay. I'm not part of this. I'm leaving, right? Doesn't do that. Sticks around. So let's just now fast forward, and now there's such a thing as trial by jury. He has to come stand there, plus all his fellow officers. And you are the jury member. Right? On top of everything you've just heard, you also need to understand that every single day that went past, the children suffered, they were tormented, they were told by the mother and any other so-called child protection agent or, these carers that the father's a tinfoil hat wearer, that he's a sovereign citizen, he's part of some cult, lives in North Queensland, yada, 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 right? They're impregnating the children's minds with these things. They've never met him, know nothing of him. And here they are entitled to do that. So keep that in mind. The other part is, what about the father's experience? Every single day without his children, what does that do to him? Right? He's lost his capacity. It's been stripped from him to be their biological protector. He's innately wired for that, and it's been stripped from him. What does that feel like? How does someone agonize like that? Can you sink into that agony? Can you give yourself that experience? You are the jury member. Every single day, he's not with them. He used to read them their bedtime stories. Let's say he never went out at all. Just stayed with his kids. That's all he cared about. He cared about being with his children and showing them how to live in a dignified manner, because he cared about truth and freedom for all. And he was so excited to teach them new skills, how they were going to be actually morally upright people, what they needed to know. He was so excited about showing them the lies that lives in society and how to see past it and actually work with it. Instead of being afraid of it and running away, standing right in the center of it with courage, showing them what it's like That's what the father was going to show the children. Okay, so now you've got to start thinking. You probably don't understand what that's like. You probably don't even think like that. You are the jury member. You need to step into that position and give that to yourself as that's who you are. How do you do that? How do you understand the agony each individual child went through? What if one of them starts cutting herself, right? What if she's starting to get suicidal? What if she's been put on all this host of medication, like, for bipolar disorder or some kind of other personality disorder? What if that start being pushed on her, right? Because she's being violated for her need to choose for herself, right? The child that's the one listening to the mother telling them she's going to suicide. What about her and her emotional shutdown? And what if she had a really deep connection with the father, stronger than anything she's ever known, right? And that's gone and taken from her. Now she has to cut all that off just to be able to survive, and then somehow make up this story in her mind that that she's responsible for her mother staying alive. What's it like to carry that burden? All of these things, they wouldn't have been in play if these officers didn't follow orders, if they actually followed conscience. So now you're the jury member, right, and listening to this. How many birthdays that the father missed out? What about the fact that he may never find out if his children are harmed, right? And he's never there for them. He doesn't get to pick them up, hold their hand, tend to them when they're unwell. Misses out on all that. Being there for their parties, their friends, learning about who they like, giving some kind of solace when they need it, some kind of guidance when they need it, skill development, playing with them. What if he loved indulging in play with his children? Right? And they loved it back. And that's how they were fulfilled. Right? Where are you going to find the magic stick that can bring all of that back as the jury member? So you tell me as the jury member, how do you believe each and every one of these individuals who initiate this, right? Because they're the ones who start it. There's none of those fake courts are going to have any power. The legislation, none of it has any power unless it's enforced. Unless someone uses their force, their physical force, like that officer spoke, that former officer, he said they had 3 ways to make it happen, right? Unless they initiate that, how can any of this come into reality? That's the burden that these people carry. So you go back and read that initial statement, right? And you tell me, do you have any better idea about what you would do? And how are you going to turn back time to give back to those children and that father what they cannot recover and what's been permanently changed forever? That's your role as the jury member. Now, if you go, that's too hard, I can't handle that, then you need to take responsibility for the system we have now. That's what you're asking to stay in place. So this is about you really growing up and being a real adult. And if you can't figure out an answer, then you've shut off from your conscience. Because I guarantee you, I'm willing to bet whatever you like, you sink into the experience, you will be able to find what would be the better way to move forward. Now that's on you to think about that deeply and see what you come up with. Okay, so you've got a lot of evidence that's been placed before you. This is what it would look like. The stuff I've shown you, the confessions, right, of people who worked in the position, what they knew they were doing, and they still did it anyway. So while you're holding all that, I've got a few more videos to go, and then hopefully we'll wind this up.
Hey there. As a former police officer, I want to tell you in under a minute why American law enforcement cannot be reformed. If you believe that police have been trained badly and that's why they maliciously abuse and kill so many people, understand that any reform program relies on those same officers to administer it and hold each other accountable to it. When I was a cop, the state sent us mandatory training on sexual harassment and disability, usually in the form of DVDs and quizzes. We goofed off on our phones during the DVDs, and our watch commanders gave us the answer key so that we would all get 100%. And cops don't rat out other cops. The ones who do are ostracized, pushed out, and sometimes even murdered by fellow officers. The culture of law enforcement will not cooperate with any training that puts civilian lives over officer comfort. More and better funded cops will not make your neighborhood safer. Trust me, I know from experience.
Okay, so now that you've got that under your belt and you're stewing on that one, now I'm going to play you a short video. It's from Albania, so don't stress about the not understanding the language. It's going to make a lot of sense. You're going to be able to understand the story really quickly just by watching it.
dones? زیر دارم. Škoda. Edhe mos e përsërit më, qetësi. Hyr! Prap me vones. Shkon. Hyr!
So if you're wondering why did I put that in the mix, if you haven't figured out how this all connects, everything in life is interconnected. Nothing happens in isolation. So here goes the connection, right? If you look at the story, if you can see the parallel, that teacher was an order follower, right? He believed that what he was doing was right, that there's such a thing as authority, and him being a good person, good moral person, his job was to follow the policy of the school, or some version of that. Now, what's the connection to the piggies, right? And I call them piggies because I don't respect any single one of them who stays in this job as they are today. So that's why I call it that, because I've got no respect for people who do what they do. So I'm just putting that on the table. So what's the connection? That's what they say. Well, I'm just doing my job. Don't put it on me. You know, I'm just doing my job. That's what my job is. So you hear that over and over while they're violating you, right? Now, the difference is that at the end, when he saw the situation that the boy was in, right, immediately his heart changed, right? So that means he wasn't rigid. He was not defending a position. He was open to seeing truth as it happens, right? He was touched by his conscience. His conscience spoke to him, and he allowed it to speak to him. He got his ego out of the way, and he allowed his conscience to be the loudest voice there is. Now, if you go back to video 4, and I recommend you go back and watch it again, that piggy even said They would say things like they'd go to the slums, where the migrants were, and they saw how poorly they lived, and they were, really affected, and they'd say, "What? Fuck it, they're not worth it. They deserve this kind of treatment." Because what's more important, this idea, this abstract in their mind, that they must rule over them. That's what these piggies must do. They cannot do it any other way, right? And that's a conscious choice. That's why I'm showing you that the difference. Now, how many of those do you really believe those piggies, they would be able to come and face up to what they've done and initiated to every single individual that they've done this to, right? How many thousands over the course of their career have they initiated this kind of violence that's precipitated a whole cascading set of events that can't be unwound now? Do you honestly believe that they have the capacity to take full ownership of what they've done and the consequences for their behavior? Do you honestly believe that? So when you're thinking make amends, what do you have in your mind specifically that would be required to make amends for the thousands of lives that they've affected, and then each individual life that's connected to those individuals they've affected, right? That precipitating. Do you honestly believe they have the power to hold all that together and take full ownership of that? So when you're saying make amends, what does that mean? That's the question. You need to have a specific thing in mind. What would you do? How would you like to see events unfold after all that came out, right? And do you imagine that they would actually be a willing participant in whatever you've got conceived in your mind? Okay, so there you have it. You've seen the mentality of what you're dealing with. It's all laid out in front of you. You're the jury member, right? You need to somehow come up with a way that the father's life and his children's lives can be made better after your intervention, right? Bearing in mind, you cannot have his experience. You cannot have their experience. How can you truly understand how it impacted them at the soul level? Like how much was really taken away from them? Okay, so now that's your responsibility because you've taken on this role. So while you're stewing on that, here's another one for you. What about you as the individual who would have seen many police road stops or arrests or like home invasions you thought were legitimate, where people's lives were destroyed forever from that point? And you actually, in your mind, thought, oh, yeah, those people are bad. They're obviously doing something bad and they deserve this kind of treatment. Right? You had that in your mind. What about that? Where's your responsibility come into it? Also keep that in mind, because that's all part of the jury process, is to unwind all those, not all, but a fair amount of those prejudices and biases you didn't recognize, but now that you're being confronted with it. And then how are you going to make an assessment of other people while you yourself are complicit in the entire structure and the ideas you held as truths, where you suppressed your own conscience? Right? What are you going to do about that? So that's what I'm going to leave you with. And while you're thinking about it, here's a place that you can get started to make sure this structure never comes into fruition again, that it's slowly dismantled piece by piece. Because if we can't get this out of the way, there's no such thing as any kind of freedom for anyone. So if you're ready to act, guys, you just go to magnacarta1215.com. There it is. You'll click on news and articles. This will take you here. And then you just scroll down. And you'll see here there's a cover letter to download, and then there's the 12 points. It's like a flyer. So just showing the cover letter. There it is up here. It's always officer in charge, because that way it goes to whoever's the highest ranking officer on that day when they get the mail. The red part is just showing the editable bits, so you would change that obviously in accordance with the station that you're sending to, and then just change to black after that. But I just want to scroll down quickly. I want to go to this bit here where it talks about what's coming for them down the pike when enough people work it out, and the correct system that we're supposed to be working under, which is trial by jury, where the people assess the crimes committed against them because they're the victims of it. So who's better to assess it than we're the victims, and the consciousness of the community, because there's a neutral space there. So it just says that they won't be standing in front of any government-appointed judges, magistrates, or court officers, because they're their protection right. They've created a legal protection network, which is just a way to conceal crime. So that will be gone. They won't have that. And then it just says what's coming from them down the pike is the things that they're looking at: trespass, assaults, thefts, extortions, threats with menaces, malfeasance in public office, etc. Are most severe for sworn officers of the law who brazenly and without apparent remorse assume the role of criminals, which is pretty much what they're doing, hands down. There's not one there that could get away with it. The offences extend all the way to sedition, which means publicly denying the validity of the Constitution, and misprision of treason and high treason, which carry respectively the punishments of full asset stripping and life in prison or even the gallows. Then it goes on to say 2 final points for consideration. 1, people who commit crimes at the behest of others are always vulnerable to the risk that the order givers might decide to tidy up loose ends by disposing of the order followers preemptively. An example of which is given in the second QR code. And the other one is most people are of the type willing to grant clemency to those who display remorse or are willing to assist in the apprehension or cessation of ongoing crimes. So it's just signed Commonwealth Constitutional Alliance. So it's all covered, guys. You don't have to put your name to it, anything like that. And there's the 12 points there. I've covered it in previous videos. So that's all the QR codes that are on there. I'm not going to read into it too much. You guys can read it in your own time. It's pretty potent, powerful. So that's all I wanted to show you. So if you're ready to back it, it's all done for you. You just need to put it together and shove it in an envelope. And you've got instructions on the website of how to do that.